and they just continued pushing forward with traditional advertising in their local markets. And they eventually expanded through innovation. Talk about disruption. They were the first ones to have chunky ice cream. So like taking the chunks of cookie dough or the chunks.
Best favorite.
Yes. Yeah. And so, you have your chocolate chips and your mint ice cream, and you have like these little tiny chocolate chips, right? That's what everyone did. These guys put massive chunks in their ice cream, and fan favorite, and it obviously went wild. They ended up selling the business for $326 million.
Welcome to the Success Flow Podcast, where our mission is simple: to be better each day and relay our findings with other relentless humans defining success for themselves. If that sounds like you, let's begin.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that as we're progressing along into 2024, that we're going to be hitting a year's worth of podcast episodes, a weekly basis, discipline and consistency there. I know that's not the topic today, but I just thought of that right now, right when we clicked record. I think it's pretty incredible, dude. Like, I think it's awesome that we're on this path right now.
Yeah, we were sitting at that coffee shop almost a year ago, like, got some overlap here. Should we just record and see where it goes? And look at us now.
I know, it's exactly right. And I think it's neat that, we're like complete unknowns, right? And I think that, not necessarily in our circles, but anyone catching us on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen to your pods, hopefully you're subscribing, liking, and following. But we're complete unknowns. Like we're not like some of the big, we're not the Joe Rogans, we're not the My First Millions, but it's a lot of fun to do, and it holds us accountable, and we get to learn something new, and we get feedback from the people in our circle, and we're, hopefully expand that reach. But today's topic, I will say, now that I bring that out, it's kind of fitting. We're going to talk about underdogs, and maybe you and I will become that underdog story down the road. But, you think about like in high school or elementary school, or whatever, you got the bully and you got the wimpy kid or whatever. And then the wimpy kid gets beat up all the time. And then the wimpy kid is triumphant and he beats up the bully and he's the underdog. And now he's the king of the castle and runs the school or whatever. Right. So you have these underdog stories, these triumphant stories, and everyone only sees the success most of the time. They don't necessarily know the path that got them there. So I've got a few stories. You've got a few stories as well, not personally. These are stories of other people that we have researched and learned about. And seeing your list, I'm excited to hear what you've got to kick us off.
Yeah, everybody likes an underdog, right? And whether it's sports or in history, everybody can relate. Everybody can relate when they had the deck stacked against them. And while we were kind of prepping, I didn't realize this. I mean, it's not that big of a stretch, but you know where the term underdog comes from?
I don't actually. No.
This might get some of the listeners riled up a little bit, but it was actually dog fighting, which makes sense given the nomenclature. But you had it's also where the term top dog comes from. Oh, they're the top dog, or he's the top dog, she's the top dog. The underdog was the dog that was losing the fight. So all the animal activists don't come after us. It might trigger some Michael Vick memories, but that's where the term came from. And yeah, I like this concept because, again, everyone's been an underdog at some point, and it always keeps you in that mindset of staying scrappy and keeping after the work, because there is very little immediate gratification in this world that's worth anything.
100%.
Nailing it down to 3, it was kind of tough. There's so many good stories out there because everybody is an underdog at some point. But I'll kick us off with James Dyson. And so the vacuum game, if you want to talk about like standards and what used to happen, Kirby was the go-to. Everyone had a Kirby vacuum. People probably have parents that were selling these Kirby's door to door. You'd come and lift the whole thing up, go do a demo in people's homes, and they were heavy, huge machines. And it was just kind of the status quo. And James Dyson was not happy with the amount of times he had to take the dust bag off and just the whole operating system. But everyone thought he was nuts. No one supported him, friends, family. They're just like, you're not going to be able to have any success here. Kirby's the way. And like those resilient folks do, James Dyson stayed after it and created the first bagless vacuum. But It took him over 5,000 prototypes
Holy
to get
damn.
to get to the Dyson. And now people may have the hair blow dryer. They may have the hand blow dryer. And like, oh, that was a quick technology that just got spun up. He was on the brink of failure hundreds of times. And because of the established manufacturers like Kirby, he just kept after it. And there's a really good podcast on this, on the Founders podcast on James Dyson, that I would direct our listeners to. But it's a household name now, and he just had such conviction in the fact that this can't be the best way this machinery can work. And even after failure after failure after failure, he saw that ultimate vision. And so I thought that was a really good one. And yeah, we've got one. We've got one in our household. Do you have a Dyson?
Yeah, well, that was Kim's Christmas present, was one of those Dyson hair dryers. I didn't even know Dyson was like vacuums, right? I didn't even know they made hair accessory or products or whatever. And dude, she loves this thing. This thing's like, it's a blow dryer and a hair straightener actually. And it's like she gets out of the shower and boom, straight and dry. It's the wildest thing. Yeah, I mean, that's a great story. It's the longevity of just like putting in the work and being consistent, and knowing it's going to work, or maybe you don't, but you just continue pushing forward, and others are probably doubting you. So that's a good story. I like that one. I've got one about a well-known actor, and that is Harrison Ford. So Harrison Ford's humble beginnings. A lot of the big actors that we hear about, they start in their careers in their 20s, or sometimes even child stars or whatever. There's some stuff that they've done, but Harrison Ford didn't have the easiest road getting into acting. And in fact, he was a carpenter to make ends meet. That was his only way to really survive, and doing odd jobs and different, small roles and things like that. So he is the carpenter. He gets hired by none other than George Lucas to do some carpentry work in his house. And George Lucas loves his work ethic and demeanor so much. He says, "Hey, I got this movie coming up. Would you want to be a small part of it?" And of course, Harrison Ford's like, "Hell yeah." Right. However he said it back then, however it was proposed, he was all in. And he did such an amazing job in this movie called American Graffiti, 1973. And it was a very small role, but they loved the work ethic, and it just started piquing the interest of other directors and casting and whatnot. So still though, that was 1973. It wasn't until 1977. So 4 or 5 years later, did George Lucas come back to him and say, "I would love for you to be in Star Wars." And we all know Harrison Ford from Star Wars and just became an international superstar. But he didn't have any success even when he got a little taste of it in 1973 up until 1977. And mind you, by the time the movie was released and he became super successful and famous and whatnot, he was 36 years old. How many people would just give up on their dreams along the way, being 36 and trying to start over and whatnot? And then obviously, after playing an incredible role of Han Solo, you had all the Indiana Jones series and whatnot. But I think the biggest underdog movie, which it was nominated for Best Movie, I think, after doing some research, but it's still underrated in my opinion. And it's my favorite Harrison Ford movie is The Fugitive. Remember that one with Tommy Lee Jones?
Great movie. That was one of the first PG-13 movies I was allowed to watch.
It's so good. It is so good. So Richard Kimball himself, Harrison Ford, is my underdog story, going from carpenter for the first 35 years of his life, essentially, to becoming international success actor, seemingly overnight, because he did an amazing job in his carpentry work. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time, but developed a relationship with the casting director, proved his worth in one area, gave him an opportunity in another area to be casted as Han Solo, and absolutely crushed it ever since.
Love it. Love it. One of my favorite actors from the 90s. I mean, it wasn't just the 90s, but as we were coming up, all those films, that one is I think a well-known story in regard to, if you've got this dream and to your point, how many people would give up but some people just don't have it in them to give up. They're not going to stop, even if you've got something on the back burner like a trade or something to pay the bills to keep you going. All it takes is one moment, and once you get that moment, to run with it, and he's never looked back. So I love that. One of the second one on my list that is near and dear, because we talk about a lot about how we need to maintain the fuel that we're putting in our body. And if we're I try to avoid fast food almost all the time, but my fast food go-to is Chipotle. And because you can go low carb, it may not be the best ingredients. I've gone down a deep rabbit hole on how they cook with seed oils, which was crushing to my soul because it was my low carb go-to on the move. But I love Chipotle. I remember when they first hit Arizona, and I think it was the Real World Austin was on at the time. They were eating Chipotle, and like, that looks so good. And Mark, who was on the podcast, he was like, oh, we got to go check out Chipotle. And we just went all the time. And I was like, this is so good. How do they not have this in Missouri? Sure enough, went home and they had them in Missouri. But when you look at the start of Chipotle, Steve Ells started it, and he did get some money from his pops. I think he framed it to his dad that he was going to start a fine dining restaurant to get the money, but he wanted to sell burritos. And so I think his goal was to it was like 107 or 108 burritos a day was his break-even point that he was going to sell. And he really wanted to focus on the fact that he could get better ingredients to make better fast food, but to do a kind of Henry Ford model that we see today, work down the line, get exactly what you want, quick, in and out the door, and you've got fresh ingredients and a fast meal. But it was there were a ton of challenges in being able to source those fresh ingredients, how it was going to, he had employment issues, and this was all in Denver, Colorado, where he started, but he kept at it and went from one burrito shop to expanding across Denver. And then we all know what happened down the road, just expanding the franchise model. I believe they got some money from McDonald's along the way before they started before they operated independently. But now there's a Chipotle on every corner, and just a great example of why can't you disrupt? That's what underdogs do, is they're typically disrupting what the status quo is. And again, back to the not giving up. He did have a little help, but that initial investment did not substitute the hard work that was necessary to build Chipotle into the chain that they are today.
Yeah, I remember in college at ASU, there was this at the MU, the what they call it? What's the MU stand for? Memorial, or I don't know. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, the MU had where all the food was and whatnot. You'd sneak over there, and they had a Chipotle type restaurant, and they'd make these amazing burritos. And my friend, her name was Michelle, she was like, you should go over to this place. It's new. It's called Chipotle. And I was like, okay. So we went over there, and I was like, holy crap, this is so good. And it's probably because McDonald's put money into it. There's probably some sort of addicting aspect to it, because it is addicting, and maybe it's just the fresh food that they have, but it's good. And it's a cool story to hear that he kind of bootstrapped that. And it was just like, I love how you mentioned two things. One is disruptor, because people don't think it's possible if you're a disruptor. It's never been done in a way that you're trying to do it. And two, he brought up Real World Austin. Real World was like, we used to watch Real World all the time, and I don't think it's on anymore, but I actually wanted
that had to help out his early marketing, his early marketing needs. If there's one way to do it, get it on the Real World.
College kids. But it was like, I remember in my college days, I wanted to film a VHS tape and send it into MTV and be on Real World one day. That was my ambition back when I was 21 years old.
Now anyway, you just have to do a podcast. Now you just have to do a podcast to get
it. There was no YouTube back then. I literally had a VHS tape in the back of my car waiting to be filmed for this interview. Anyway, things have changed. Well, sticking on the food thing, I think a cool story is Ben and Jerry's. So Ben and Jerry's, also not the healthiest, when you're trying to be healthy, but everyone loves ice cream. And
It's a
Ben
way to
and
cope with
Jerry-
your emotions for some people.
That is absolutely true. Down in 1 gallon of ice cream a day at a time, I guess. 1978, childhood friends. Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield in Vermont. Like, what the heck comes out of Vermont? And these guys started with $12,000 after paying $5 to take an ice cream making course at Penn State University. They paid $5 to learn how to make ice cream, decided they wanted to be the biggest ice cream maker in the world, or, maybe that was their drive. I don't know if they're the biggest in the world now or not, but all that matters is they each put in $4K. They took out a loan for another $4K and just went to town bootstrapping this thing and just told anybody and everybody who had an empty stomach or a full stomach that would want to try their ice cream. And they started making some waves actually in their local markets, to the point where Haagen-Dazs came in and tried to stop them. And Haagen-Dazs failed. And they just continued pushing forward with traditional advertising in their local markets. And they eventually expanded through innovation. Talk about disruption. They were the first ones to have chunky ice cream. So like taking the chunks of cookie dough, or the chunks.
Best favorite.
Yes. Yeah. And so, you have your chocolate chips and your mint ice cream, and you have like these little tiny chocolate chips, right? That's what everyone did. These guys put massive chunks in their ice cream, and fan favorite, and it obviously went wild. They ended up selling the business for $326 million. And
it's a lot of ice cream.
It is a lot of ice cream. And we all love Ben and Jerry's at every sporting event that we go to.
What's your favorite flavor?
My favorite, I would say, I just go traditional cookie dough, Reese's, throwing that in there. I don't even know what it's called. That's what's cool too, is they have like random names for their ice creams as well. But what about you?
Cherries Garcia used to be my favorite. Play on words for Jerry Garcia, but yeah, their marketing's on point with how they name those things. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Well, back to I'm gonna take it back to when we talk about underdog sports, like we often do on this podcast. Probably one of the most common terms is used in sports, and my favorite underdog story in sports, which, gosh, there's so many, is back to when they were the St. Louis Rams. A guy named Kurt Warner, and I think a lot of people do know this story, but made a feature film about it the last few years, which has a little bit of a Hallmark flair to it, but I still loved it.
Called Underdog Story. American Underdog, yeah.
American Underdog. And just a great human being. And I think about this all the time, how many quarterbacks there are, or multiple other positions as well, but quarterbacks that literally just don't get their shot. It's all about hitting the timing and the seam to where you get to showcase your abilities. And back in 99, Trent Green goes down in preseason, and Dick Vermeil famously quoted by saying, "We will rally around Kurt Warner and we will play good football." And they went on to win the Super Bowl, and I'm getting goosebumps just thinking of it. But before then, you go back, and he was a Northern Iowa guy, good in college, but not with a big program. Does not get drafted. Spent some time with he went undrafted and then wound up on the Green Bay Packers. I think Mike Brunell was, obviously there's a guy named Brett Favre up there at the time, which was not going anywhere. And then Brunell was on the roster, and he did not last long. Didn't see anything great out of him in camp. Gets cut, goes over and plays in Europe when the NFL had a European league for the Amsterdam Admirals. And then finally, Dick Vermeil throws him on the roster, thinking that they had their guy in Trent Green, and a good football program going there with Marshall Faulk. And it was his time to shine. Wound up setting all kinds of NFL records that year, goes and wins a Super Bowl. But at one point in that whole journey, when he was in between and before the Europe card got called, he was bagging groceries in a small town in Iowa, trying to make ends meet, meets Brenda Warner. Well, she wasn't Brenda Warner at the time, but she had a special needs child that he wound up adopting as his own, and just kept after it that entire journey, and goes on to NFL stardom. And then it didn't end there. He then gets traded off from the Rams, due to they were moving on to Mark Bulger, winds up going to the Giants. Doesn't have a bunch of success, but then after making his way over to the Arizona Cardinals, other things, falling in his favor, gets the starting job and takes them back to the Super Bowl that he didn't win. But just if they made a movie called American Underdog about him, they don't get too much better than that. And just a stand-up human being, Christian guy, now in a broadcasting role, Kurt Warner, Underdog.
That's a great one. Did I tell you that I shook his hand like just a few months ago? Yeah, I was at True Foods having a lunch meeting or something. And I'm walking out, and I see him out of the corner of my eye, and I'm like, "Is that Kurt Warner?" And so I stopped the conversation I was talking to. I was like, I gotta say hi. Like, I don't know why. I'm not even like a Rams fan or even a Cardinals fan, but Kurt Warner. Like, how can you not? Because of that story of just a genuine human being from what we know of him. Obviously, we don't know him personally, but walked up and I was like, "Hey, Kurt." And he was like, "Yeah." And I go, "I'm Stephen Harris. Just wanted to shake your hand and just introduce myself and just hope you have a great day." And that was it. And he shook me. He's like, "Oh, great, nice to meet you. Thanks for saying hi." And that was it. The interaction. He's shorter than I thought. I mean, I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'5". He's like 6'1", but the dude is jacked. Like, he's still got it. Like, he is solid. And anyway, it just some random guy walking up to him in a parking lot and him to just shake my hand and just say, "Hey, thanks for saying hi." It was pretty neat. Just a testament to who he is. But yeah, I remember
Class act Hall of Famer.
Yeah, for sure. And I was at, I think, the Cardinals playoff game when they were at that run. It was actually against Green Bay. I think it was one of the ones that went like 48-45. It was a crazy game, one of those playoff games. And they fell short on that one. Well, now that you brought up football and Super Bowls and all this stuff, I kind of have two. I don't know how many more you got left. I've got a couple athletes that we could talk about if you want me to run through both or if you've got another in between. What do you think?
Oh, fire away.
Okay. So obviously we just had Super Bowl 58 and being an Arizona native for the most part, moved here when I was small. You can't help but love Brock Purdy and his story. And I didn't do any prep work on this. I just thought about this. He went to a high school in Southeast Gilbert, Arizona. So if you're familiar with kind of Maricopa County area, went to Perry High School. He's only 24 years old, so he graduated like 6 years ago. And he was this absolute stud in high school, like dominated the state, just did some incredible stuff. He ends up getting a scholarship to Iowa State, the Cyclones. But he's the third stringer as a freshman. So same story as Kurt, right? He's third stringer. What ends up happening is the starter goes down and the backup becomes ineffective. So they say, well, let's put Brock in and see what he can do. By the fifth game he was thrown in, he never let the reins go for the next 4 years. He was the starter from there on out. So starting third string quarterback as a freshman, becoming the first stringer, just like Kurt, taking advantage and seizing his opportunities and never letting that, never giving that up, doesn't happen overnight. It goes back to the work and preparation he put in behind the scenes. So then when that time came that he could jump in and just go. Well, the same story happened to him when he got drafted in the NFL. He was the last pick in the NFL. Everyone hears about Mr. Irrelevant, and he's the last pick in the NFL 2 years ago by the San Francisco 49ers. And guess what? He's the third string quarterback again. They just drafted Trey Lance the year before that, and they had Jimmy Garoppolo. Long story short, 2022 happens. Trey Lance, I think, actually takes the starting job, gets hurt in like week 2, and then Jimmy G gets hurt in like week 13, and Brock Purdy gets thrown in as the third string quarterback. And guess what? Took him to the NFC Championship game. This year, they went all the way to the Super Bowl. He stayed the quarterback. They got rid of everybody else, and he never let the reins go. And say what you want about the kid, but the dude is a workhorse, and he just seizes the opportunities in front of him. And I think there's a story. Jed York is the owner of the Niners. A story about how Kyle Shanahan came up to him in training camp after they drafted Brock Purdy and goes, "Jed, I think our third string quarterback's our best quarterback." You imagine as like the owner of an NFL team, you just spent your last pick and your best quarterback is not the guy you're paying $20 million a year, Jimmy G, or your first round pick from a year before that. And sure enough, they let it play out. Brock Purdy gets his chance, and they go to the Super Bowl. They didn't win. Chiefs fans are happy about that. But Mahomes is going to Mahomie. He's going to do his thing. But anyway, your Kurt Warner story just reminded me of Brock Purdy, and maybe he'll get a Super Bowl one of these days, and he'll have that triumphant experience. But I think just the success he's had so far is a pretty cool underdog story there.
That is a great one. And I think that, again, even though we're talking about sports and large picture business, it's good for the listeners to think about, where are you an underdog right now? What is it that's itching at you? It may not be your current career, but what is it about you where you're sleeping? People don't have any idea what you're bringing to the table, and how can you start watering those gifts and those skills and showing the world what you're really made of.
Yeah, I agree so much. And, one of the last ones I wanted to kind of bring up, the story, obviously everyone knows this guy, but his mom said, he's not out there to prove others wrong. He's out there to prove himself right. And I think that's what every human being or underdog or perceived underdog, most of the time, no one's putting pressure on you to be great. You're putting more pressure on yourself, and your limiting beliefs are what's stopping you. And so that guy's mom was, her son is Steph Curry, who's the greatest shooter of all time, right? He's broken every single 3-point record imaginable, and he's still only 36 years old or whatever. And he could probably play until he's 45, just posting up in the corner. And it's his work ethic. It just goes to the point where he was undrafted, or he had one college looking at him coming out of high school. He was a scrawny kid. His dad played in the NBA, so he had some talent in his genes, but he was not looked at by any big college. Goes to Davidson. They go on their Cinderella run, which is an underdog story of its own, in 2008, being the 10 seed and going all the way to the Elite Eight, I believe it was. And that captured the entire country of who the heck this kid was, because he was taking down the titans of college basketball at the time. And then he gets picked up by the Warriors, injury prone first few years, but then just has shined the last, 10, 12 years of his career in the NBA. There was, you listen to My First Million a lot, Sam Parr and Sean Peary, that podcast, right? We talk about it all the time. Did you listen to the one Tony Robbins episode?
I did.
Yeah, that was amazing. And one day, Tony, we're going to get you on the Success Flow podcast, by the way.
Absolutely.
He brought up this story, it's on YouTube. He said it multiple times. Let's see if we can play this. But it's a story about Steph Curry and how he has been able to be successful. So let me see if I can share this screen.
But Steph is a perfect example of what you're describing. That he shoots, 500 shots a day, to give you an idea, 3,500 shots a week. Think about it, 14,000 shots a month, 168,000 shots a year. These are practice shots. So he's been in the NBA 15 years. He's done 2.52 million shots in practice. In his entire career, he's only taken 15,000 shots. And he's made 3,000 three-pointers, and he's the greatest in history. Less than 0.1% of his shots have actually shown up at a game. So I always tell people, you're rewarded in public for what you practice in private.
That is such a cool video. And it's actually a story that I share. I actually shared with Jack the other day, because he was getting down on himself in practice. And I said, practice is for the reps. Practice is for the reps for the game. You're going to swing the bat thousands and thousands of times, but you're only going to get in that bat 3 or 4 times in a game, right? And so you are training your body to not have to use your mind. Steph doesn't think when he shoots, because his body is so trained to hit those shots, because of the 2.5 million shots he's taken in practice versus the 15,000 that people see. And so it's the work done behind closed doors that makes an underdog great, because they're like, where did this guy come from? Right? When you get your time to shine, the prep, the discipline, the consistency, everything you're doing on your own time without anyone watching, and you seize that opportunity and you shine and you go and make it happen. Like, whoa, how did that guy do that? How'd that gal do this? Right? And it's all about the work ethic. So I love that video. It's a really good one. Tony Robbins obviously is the man. We'll put the YouTube link in the show notes here.